Hi, my name is Meredith Jones. I am the author of Women of the Street, Why Female Money Managers Generate Higher Returns and How You Can Too. I'm also a consultant around responsible investing and ESG, both for investors and for corporate issuers. And I also work in diversity and inclusion in the financial services industry. Now, for someone with my background, it's actually pretty odd that I ended up in the wealth management, financial services, investment industry to begin with, mostly because I grew up what I like to joke with people as powdered milk poor, which means that I didn't actually know that milk came in liquid form because my family was too poor to be able to afford it until I was old enough to go to grade school and you could buy those tiny cartons of milk for 25 cents. So it's ironic that I do what I do at this point, but in a way it's also not that ironic. My mom started out as a chemistry teacher before switching over to math and then getting a degree finally in epidemiology. So she kind of put the S and M in STEM. And I know that sounds dirty, but she clearly dominates in those fields, and she tried to ensure that her daughters did as well. So we were encouraged, some might say bullied, into embracing math. And I think she used to regularly threaten me to send me to a convent if I did poorly in math and science related topics. So I really had that encouragement to embrace topics that would lead to this type of career. And then in addition to that, weirdly, even though I grew up in Alabama, I had a junior high school teacher that taught my entire class how to trade stocks back in the day, where you had to look up the stock prices in the paper and follow how well your stock was doing by getting the daily paper every day. So we all had paper portfolios around age 12, 13. So by the time the opportunity came up for me to interview for an entry-level hedge fund analyst back in 1990, never mind, then I really felt confident in doing that because I had had exposure to business, exposure to investing, and I was very confident with my math skills. And so for the past 20 some odd years, I've continued to stay in the industry following a fairly circuitous route, to be quite honest. I started out on the hedge fund side, being a hedge fund analyst for a multi-family office slash hedge fund of hedge funds, before going on to a quantitative analysis shop, and then to some professional services before coming full circle and ending up back on the investor side of the equation again, which is where I still remain today. But in terms of how this has impacted me, it's probably no surprise that I ended up where I am now that you know my background. And it's probably no surprise that my interests really fall towards things like ESG and diversity and inclusion and how we can actually embrace people who look different in order to make more money for everyone. So I have a soapbox that I stand on for a lot of topics, actually. One of the main ones that I'm quite passionate about is diversity and inclusion in the financial services industry. And I'm very passionate about that because I look at this as one of the greatest missed opportunities that we have in this industry. An opportunity that if we executed on it better, we would actually have more stable financial markets, we would have greater wealth creation, and individual investment and wealth management firms would actually have better revenue and profitability. And so that's a pretty compelling argument for me to try to convince people to come get on my soapbox with me. So for example, if you look at women in the financial services industry right now, no matter how you slice it, there are an incredibly small number of women in this industry. If you look at registered investment advisors, for example, they're only about 35% of the industry's. Financial planners are only about 23%. Chief investment officers at institutional investors are maybe 19%. CFAs, I think, are around 18%. Women in senior positions at private equity are about 11, 12%. Women in venture capital, maybe 7, 8%. Women in hedge funds, less than 3%. And it just amazes me that after 10 years of being engaged in this space, that those are still the numbers that we're facing. And yet, when you look at the body of research that shows how well women are innately skilled in things like investment management and investing hygiene, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we would all be better off from Wall Street to Main Street if we did a better job of embracing gender diversity and, of course, racial diversity as well into the investment management industry. So, for example, the title of my book, Women of the Street, Why Female Money Managers Generate Higher Returns and How You Can Too. There's a lot of evidence that shows that female portfolio managers, whether at a retail level or whether at a professional level, actually can add alpha. And so those are actual returns that we're missing out on. In addition, if you look at the people who are taking risk with capital on Wall Street, about 95% of them are male. And so we have a economic ecosystem that's really dominated by one particular behavioral pattern. And so anytime you do that, you're going to tend to have bubbles and burst. And so there have been some studies, for example, that show that if there were more women involved in trading in the financial markets, that we would have less volatility in the marketplace. And that could be a good thing. I mean, let's face it, except for the last 10 years leading up to 2020, we have a tendency to go through periods where we're on a vomit comet in the markets. And so if we can control bursts like what happened in 2008, wouldn't that be a good thing? It turns out that women actually have a tendency to be buying when men are selling, so they're a source of liquidity in the markets as well, so that can be beneficial to everyone. When you look at who is becoming the dominant group of consumers and investors, that actually is changing demographically. So women right now, for example, control 51.3% of the investable wealth in the United States, and that number is expected to go up to 66% by 2030. If you look at Latino, Latinx, Latina, and African American millionaires and high net worth earners, those numbers are actually going up faster than Caucasian demographics, and so they're the consumers of the future. And so a lot of GDP is actually is driven by consumer spending. And so by not having more diversity in venture capital, which is of course making sure the companies of tomorrow are available, then we may not actually be filling those needs. So we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot there too. And then, of course, from a Main Street perspective, there's been research that shows, for example, that women-run companies have a tendency to create jobs at a faster rate. You look at diverse companies, they have a tendency to do better with problem solving, which creates corporate stability, which creates job stability. When you look at people like firemen or policemen, they're the beneficiaries of pension funds. And so if they're not getting access to diverse talent, they end up suffering too in their retirement and in any kind of disability that they may have. So I really believe from a capitalist perspective that we need to really embrace diversity in order to maximize returns and profitability for everyone across the spectrum, again, from Main Street to Wall Street. I feel pretty much the same about ESG. I think ESG is starting to get the attention that it deserves. Luckily, it hasn't been quite as long of a ramp up because I think that COVID, quite frankly, has highlighted just how much environmental, social, and governance risks can manifest into losses and volatility. And, from again, a capitalist standpoint, I also know that there is plenty of research out there that shows that companies that do a better job of embracing ESG tend to have higher corporate performance. And again, the capitalist in me loves that. But the hippie in me actually loves the fact that a side effect of doing ESG well is that we end up with more resilient companies, more resilient economies, and a more resilient planet. And so, again, come get on my soapbox with me. You're welcome anytime. COVID and me. Oh God, how has COVID not impacted my life and my business? It's been Amazing and interesting and not altogether pleasant. And there are days when I feel ready to take on the world and like we can totally handle this. And there are days where I want to be my cat. I want to just lay in a lump in a spot of sunshine and try to forget that all of this is going on. It's been a challenge to keep myself busy. I live alone, obviously with cats. You know, as a result of that, during lockdown and whatnot, I had to find things to do. I ended up buying and learning how to play the ukulele badly. And most of my days revolve around the decision of should I wear a formal t-shirt or should I put on a casual t-shirt for meetings. I can say that business hasn't really slowed down at all for someone who is engaged in ESG investing. COVID again has been a massive testing ground for companies' ESG metrics and factors. For example, if you look at things like supply chain management, ability to remote work, worker safety. If you look at things like stock buybacks and how well positioned or how poorly positioned companies were to maintain their workforce and their operations in the face of having potentially done some pretty massive stock buybacks. All of that was really highlighted during COVID. So that part of my life has definitely been incredibly busy. And then, of course, too, if you look at the United States, obviously we've been having quite a few conversations around social justice. And so that means that I'm having a lot more conversations with investors about effective ways to boost diversity in their portfolio, A, from a social justice perspective, but B, as I mentioned earlier, also because it can have a diversifying and alpha amplifying impact on a portfolio. So I just spend a lot of time on conference calls. In fact, I am so sick of looking at my own face. It's amazing. I mean, normally I would travel 100,000 plus miles a year. This year I quit traveling in February. I haven't been in an airport. I don't know how I can get through my day without getting a full body pat down these days, because that was just pretty commonplace for me. I guess I look incredibly dangerous. I haven't had bad airport food. I haven't sprinted 30 some odd gates and high heels anytime recently. Instead, I spend an awful lot of time glued to my office chair, staring at tiny little blocks across the screen, trying to have meaningful conversations with people who I may never have met. So it's been challenging. And of course that spills over into your social life too. I told somebody that I'll know that we've returned to normal when I can have a drink with somebody without having to stare at my own face at the same time. So I am looking forward to not being in the new normal, but maybe being somewhere back closer to the old normal, although as a rational person, I don't know when that may happen. I do live in a southern state in the United States. We are not currently doing a great job of controlling coronavirus. So the end does not look nigh for this situation, and I have my mother, who I mentioned in my intro, lives just about a mile down the street from me. She's now 76 years old, and so I have to be careful, not just for myself, but for her as well, because I'm the person who gets her groceries and her medications and who takes her out and airs her out, once a week or so. So I would say I'm definitely on the Corona coaster along with everyone else, trying to keep busy and sometimes being just a little too successful at it. So what do I want to do in the future? I don't know, world domination. Actually, at this moment, I would just like to eat food that doesn't require me to cook it or have to clean up after it. So again, for all the people that could be wearing a mask, if you could wear a mask, that'd really help me out. But seriously, in terms of professional and personal goals, one of the goals that I have is I would really like to see more diversity in the industry. When I first got into the industry in 1998, it took me 10 years to meet another woman who had a job that was similar in description to mine. 10 years. And I know it's corny, but they do say if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so for the generation of girls and women who are getting into the industry or considering a career in investing in financial services at this point, I want to make sure that doesn't happen for you. And so as a result of that, I actually sit on the board of directors for a nonprofit called Rock the Street Wall Street. And our goal is to provide a year of financial and investment literacy education to high school girls, because girls start dropping out of STEM-related topics and math specifically around age 11, and that accelerates around age 15. So we have pretty good intervention these days at the college and at the graduate school level, but unfortunately that's just too late. And so this organization provides this training across the United States. Last year we had almost 1,000 girls go through the program, many of whom indicated after completing the program that, number one, their financial and investment literacy had increased, and we measured this through testing. And number two, they indicated that they were much more likely to consider a career in financial services or investing going forward. And so that to me is great. I would like to see as many girls go through that program and continue going through the program, because we can do it anywhere from 1 year to 4 years. You start out learning things like budgeting, and you end up, if you stay with it for 4 years, learning how to trade options. So I would like to work very hard with that group to see if we can ensure that we have the best possible pipeline of talent coming into this industry going forward. I also continue to do a lot of research on diverse outperformance in investing. I worked with the NAIC, the National Association of Investment Companies, on a white paper just this year that showed that diverse private equity managers actually outperform non-diverse managers. And again, I just would like to keep bludgeoning the industry with information that, yes, this may be the right thing to do, but it's the right thing to do both from the perspective of a moral compass, and also from the perspective of profitability and revenue. So those are things that are very important to me. I'd also like to continue to see companies really boost their ESG. And when I say that, I mean their true ESG. So, I think there's a lot of companies out there that feel like ESG is all this warm and fuzzy things, like we give to charity and we have volunteer days for our employees. And that's all great. I am not saying that's not a good thing. But again, the capitalist part of me knows that really mitigating and capitalizing on your ESG risks and opportunities means that those things need to be financially material to your company. Those are the things that create resilient companies, resilient economies, and resilient individuals, because they continue to have income and jobs when we face something crazy like what we've just done. And so working with companies to get them away from the idea that ESG is just something that's nice to do, and instead get them to think about it from the perspective of this is something you need to do in order to future-proof your business. That's something that I feel obviously very strongly about, and I will continue to work with corporate clients to push that agenda, and I will continue to work with investors and investment managers to try to get them to push that agenda, because the companies really react primarily to investor pressure. And so you have to work the ecosystem from both sides in order to get to a place where you're going to see real systemic change. So earlier I mentioned that I was kind of tired of the new normal and was looking to go somewhere back closer to the old normal. But to be quite frank, I don't know that that's possible. And also, I'm not 100% sure that it's desirable. From the standpoint of being able to go out to happy hour with friends and to eat a dinner that I don't have to cook or load the dishwasher afterwards, all of those things I think are eventually possible, assuming that we get over ourselves when it comes to questioning science and things like that. But from the standpoint of the old normal, where again, we've got companies that are taking more of a shareholder perspective than a stakeholder perspective, where we have a lack of diversity and inclusion in the investment and financial services business, I hope we don't go back to that. I think that this has been a real inflection point in the conversations around those topics, and it's up to us to push the agenda forward now. And again, at the end of the day, I think what we're looking at is real improvements for a lot of people from a social justice perspective, from a resiliency perspective, from just a quality of life perspective. And again, that's all great. But again, for the capitalist in me, thinking about how making those changes could possibly make us more resilient for the next COVID, which may be climate change. It may be something that we don't even know about yet. But we've got to start thinking that way, in a way that is more holistic, in a way that is more inclusive, that doesn't create have and have-nots, and that helps to manage and mitigate the risks and capitalize on the opportunities that are before us. So I hope that we take this situation as incentive to do all of those things, while at the same time, God, please just let me be able to go to happy hour again. 2-for-1 drinks, I miss you.